Taraweeh is chapter 16. Chapter 16 consists of 3 different sections. We have a continuation of Surah Al-Kahf up until the end of this chapter. We have the Surah Maryam and we have Surah Taha. These are the 3 surahs that are going to be recited in today's Taraweeh. The remainder of Surah Al-Kahf speaks about the story of Musa and Khadr in further detail. It's quite an interesting story. It teaches us the paradoxes in life that aren't seemingly clear to us. So this story revolves around 3 matters predominantly. The first is Musa is provided with a mentor and a teacher for the first time in his life. After having been given prophecy, after having become the leader of the Israelites, he was always in a position of authority and influence. And Allah sent a man to him who possessed supreme knowledge. And the knowledge that Khadr had was far superior than the knowledge that Musa possessed. So Khadr said to Musa that I've been instructed to take you on a journey, and my only condition for you is to abstain from questioning me. Your job is to learn from me, and my job is to teach you. So they embark on this journey, and 3 incidents occur. Incidents that Musa doesn't have the ability to fathom completely. So as a result of not being able to understand what's happening, he starts to pose repetitive questions to Khadr. First, they boarded a ship, and Khadr was seen putting a hole into this seaworthy ship. And Musa is shocked. He's saying, this ship belongs to righteous, good people, and you're harming and ruining the ship of others. And Khadr responded to him, do not question me, for I have knowledge that you don't possess. They then moved on, and there was a young boy, and Khadr struck this young boy with the intent of killing him, and the young boy died. And Musa is now at the verge of losing his sanity, that now you're killing. How is there any goodness in what you're doing? And then Khadr responds to him with the same answer. Do not question me, for your job is to learn from me. Your job isn't to question me. If you do this one more time, this journey will come to an end. And Musa understands deep within that this man has been sent by Allah for Musa to learn lessons from him, for Musa to develop as a person through his mentorship and teachings. And finally, the 3rd incident that occurred is they were passing by a town where a wall was being knocked down. And Khadr took it upon himself to rebuild this wall. And Musa is now confused. And he says to Khadr, the people of this village are tirelessly knocking down this particular wall, and you are exerting all your energy in rebuilding the very thing that they have just about taken down. And Khadr then becomes very sick and tired of the answers and the repetitive questions. So he informs Musa of the divine reasoning of his actions. And these were all things he was instructed to do divinely. He says, as for the ship, there was a tyrant and an oppressive ruler who was taking all sound ships from people. So I placed a hole in this ship with the intent of making it deficient, so the king would not take this ship from the poor owner. As for the wall, I rebuilt the wall because the wall has treasure beneath it that was left for pious, righteous children who are going to inherit it in good time. And as for the young boy that was killed, it was an instruction, divine instruction from Allah, given his parents were very righteous and upright, and they had a praiseworthy reputation in this world. Allah feared that through his disobedience and his rebelliousness, he would tarnish their reputation and their efforts. I covered the story in very brief detail. The story is much lengthy and it has much more detail to it. But the point being here is Allah sometimes ordains for certain incidents to happen in our lives that we can't fully comprehend. And I mentioned in one of the previous sessions, we possess a pixel while Allah possesses the entire photo. We only have a small deficient understanding of the affairs of this world. And it's sometimes difficult for us to understand the whys and the hows and the do's and the don'ts. And this is where trusting and being content in our Lord's decree comes to play. After speaking about this story, Allah transitions into speaking about some of the benefits of the story of Dhul Qarnayn, who was a just and righteous ruler who was gifted with power and authority and dominance. And he was tested and trialed via Ya'juj and Ma'juj. And this is something that's spoken of in quite some detail. And at the end of the story, because of his justice and integrity that he displayed in the face of trial and test, Allah gifted him with building a barrier through which the Ya'juj and Ma'juj could be contained up until the end of time. Allah then speaks about the horrors of the Day of Judgment and some of the affairs that will occur towards the end of time. Allah speaks about the resurrection of human beings, how they will stand before Allah, uncircumcised, unclothed, in a state of fear and petrification, being questioned for all the actions that they carried out in this world, both good and both bad, cautioning us from committing sin and flaws, so we become unprepared on that day. Then Allah begins Surah Maryam. Surah Maryam, it's quite self-explanatory. These are all Meccan chapters, by the way. All the chapters we're covering were revealed towards the later part of the Meccan period. They all follow the same pattern as the previous chapter. So Surah Maryam predominantly covers a few stories. It covers, number one, the story of Zakaria and Yahya. Zakaria was the uncle of Maryam alayhi salam. And Zakaria was childless. He wasn't given progeny. So the first part of the chapter, the section, it covers the endless, heartfelt supplications of Zakaria, where he implores Allah to give him the blessing of a child. And he continues to ask Allah in a genuine fashion while submitting to his will and displaying his humility and his deficiency, teaching us how to make supplications, teaching us how to respond with tests, with trials, with hurdles and difficulties. In the end, he is blessed with Yahya, a son. And Allah tells us in the Qur'an that Zakaria called out to his Lord, saying, "Oh my Lord, grant me a child." And Allah says, so we responded to his prayer instantly, and we blessed him with Yahya. The next story that's covered is the story of Maryam and Isa. Allah speaks about the miraculous birth of Isa that wasn't from a marital relationship, like other human beings tend to have. Allah speaks about some of the divine affairs that occur while Isa was just an infant. How he spoke in the cradle when the people were accusing his mother of blasphemous things. And he said that I am a slave of Allah, and Allah has made me a prophet, and He's made me a source of blessing wherever I go in this world. Teaching the people that this child was not like normal children. It's a miraculous birth. And this is something that's confirmed by other Abrahamic faiths with different details. The other thing that's also mentioned is the story of Musa and Harun, who were both brothers. Allah speaks about the incident where Musa is instructed to go and convey a series of words to the Pharaoh, who was an oppressive, antagonizing king of that time. And Musa was quite intimidated by this duty that he was given. So he made a heartfelt dua. He says that, "Oh Allah, make me a minister, somebody who can assist me in carrying out this weighty task." And Musa was reported to have had a speech impediment, according to certain reports, indicating that he wasn't the best of speakers. He understood his strengths, he understood his weaknesses. So for that reason, he asked Allah to make Harun his minister who would assist him in speaking and calling out the Pharaoh for all the evil and immorality that he is carrying out upon the earth. Then Allah moves on to the next chapter, which is Surah Taha. And Surah Taha is titled after the word Taha, and these are letters in the Qur'an that don't have any significant meaning. You'll find throughout the Quranic discourse there are letters that are of a similar structure. Alif, Lam, Mim. Kaf, Ya, Ha, Ain, Sad. Ha, Mim. Alif, Lam, Ra. These are all Arabic letters that appear towards the beginning of the chapters. And the scholars have unanimously agreed that they do not symbolize any particular meaning. And among the benefits of the placement of these letters towards the beginning of Quranic sections is to indicate to the Arabs of that time who this book was revealed to, that this book is in your language. Because the Arabs of that time, they were under the impression that this speech is a form of magic. This speech is not speech that's produced via the Arabic language, because they couldn't understand the rhetorical devices that were used. They couldn't understand the formation of sentences. They couldn't compete with the structure that's used within Quranic verses. So they resorted to accusing the language of this book to be non-Arabic. And for that reason, Allah began the chapters using the very alphabet that they use to construct their day-to-day speech, indicating to them this is Arabic, but this is from the Lord of the worlds. It's not from any human being. In Surah Taha, the story that's discussed throughout is the story of Musa. It's probably one of the few chapters in the Qur'an where the story of Musa is narrated to us in intricate detail. Story of the prophets are scattered throughout the Quranic discourse. We discussed this previously. But Surah Taha is one of the surahs where it's related in proper detail. Allah starts off with talking about the exile of Musa. After he mistakenly killed a Coptic, and the people of Egypt at the time were split into two categories. You had the Coptics, who were the people of Pharaoh, and you had the Israelites, who were the downtrodden, enslaved people of Egypt. And Musa was reported to have sympathized with the Israelites because they were undergoing oppression and persecution in Egypt. So one day he saw a Coptic man bullying an Israelite. So he tried to diffuse the situation. In the process, Musa physically assaulted the Coptic as a result of just defending the honor of the Israelite and helping the weak and the poor. And this Coptic, he died. Now when this Coptic died, the news reached the ears of the chiefs and the Pharaoh himself. And they sent an entire army to assassinate Musa at one point. And he was told by an impartial body that you need to leave this land. If you don't leave this land, you will be killed. And Allah tells us in the Qur'an, فَخَرَجَ مِنْهَا خَائِفًا يَتَرَقَّبْ, that he left Egypt in a state of fear and confusion, because he understood that he made a mistake. In fact, Musa explicitly says that what I did was from the shaitan, it's a mistake, so forgive me, O Allah. And then he left that land in a state of fear and confusion, not knowing where he's heading. Allah then speaks about how he met his soon-to-be wife. There were two women who were queuing up to take water out of a well. And Musa saw these two women, so he assisted them in extracting water from the well. And these happened to be the daughters of the Prophet Shu'aib alayhi salam. Later on, Musa is offered the hand of one of these two women in marriage, so he marries her. And then Allah tells us that Musa is instructed to go back to Egypt after having settled in Madian for a certain number of years. And why is he told to go back to Egypt? This is when he's told to convey to the Pharaoh a weighty speech that he was very, very reluctant to do, given the fact that the Pharaoh wasn't somebody who you could reason with. Rather, it would result in some form of physical altercation, and it would escalate. So Musa took with him his brother Harun, and Allah very thoroughly narrates to us the finer details of the acceptance of Islam in the kingdom of the Pharaoh. That when Musa went to the Pharaoh and he challenged him intellectually, the Pharaoh was unable to respond to Musa and to rebut some of the intellectual arguments that Musa had put forth for the existence of God. And a lot of the chiefs of the Pharaoh, in the presence of Musa, they openly accepted Islam. In fact, in one surah in the Qur'an, there's a portion designated to mu'minun min ali fir'aun, that the believing person from the chiefs of the Pharaoh. There's a section of the chapter designated to the Islam of this particular person, who's among the elite members of the Pharaoh's council. And he accepted Islam as a result of the convincing arguments that Musa used when engaging in dialogue with the Pharaoh. Following this, there was a duel that took place between Musa and the magicians. And through Allah's permission, Musa was able to transform his staff into a snake. And he had a glowing hand. And these miracles, people looked at the miracles that Musa was performing and they were in shock. And Musa said that this is not magic. Rather, this is through Allah's permission. I'm his prophet and messenger, and he's given me the ability to carry out divine miracles through his permission subhanahu wa ta'ala. Towards the end of Surah Taha, Allah then refers back to the horrors of the Day of Judgment once again. And these verses are Meccan. And why are they Meccan verses? Because the people in Mecca, they rejected the prophetic message the same way the people of the past, they rejected their prophets. That's a correlating pattern here. Allah is narrating stories and incidents that occurred throughout the course of history to send a confronting message to the Meccan pagan Arabs. That the path that you're treading on is a path that your forefathers treaded on. And you are only heading towards your own destruction and your own doom. What are the lessons that we learn from chapter 16? The first lesson that we learn is not everything that appears to be bad for us is bad for us. And not everything that appears to be good for us is good for us. And that's why Allah Azza wa Jalla in Surah Al-Baqarah, He says, عَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌ لَكُمْ. Allah says that it's possible that you may like something and it's bad for you. عَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌ لَكُمْ. And it's possible that you may love something and it's bad for you. So here Allah is teaching us that a car accident that we've been involved in may bring about worry, anxiety and depression for many people. It may result in them questioning their Creator, because it could be their lives will never be the same given some of the injuries that they had following the accident. And in these situations, it's crucial we remind ourselves that we do not have knowledge of what's good for us and bad for us. Rather, Allah knows what benefit and harm worldly affairs bring in our lives. And Umar al-Khattab was reported to have said in a famous narration, when he was lying down during his caliphate, despite having racked up hundreds and thousands of pounds, and he had the ability to live like a king, he was laying down on a straw mat. And some of the people came in, they saw Umar lying down in this position. They said, "O leader of the believers, how are you lying on a straw mat while the other kings are lying down in luxurious beds and palaces and mansions?" And Umar said, "I do not know what's good for me or what's bad for me. I leave my affairs in the hands of the one who defines goodness and defines evil." And there are similar statements to that effect by other companions, where they understood that good and bad are truly defined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a believing person is instructed to ask Allah for that which is good for him. Even when we're unsure about a certain decision we're going to make in life, we're instructed to pray istikhara. I'm sure we've all heard of this prayer before. The Sahaba used to say, we were instructed to carry out Salatul Istikhara the same way we were taught the Qur'an. Meaning it was an instrumental part of our lives. And when we make the dua for istikhara, one of the things we say, if this is good for us, if this is bad for us. Oh Allah, if this isn't good for me, distance. Make distance between me and this particular decision I'm going to make. And if it is good for me, then facilitate it for me. What's the fundamental lesson that this dua is teaching us? That we don't know what's good and bad for us. So we're in this never-ending circle of asking Allah for help because of our deficiency in understanding. This is the first lesson that we learn. The second lesson that we learn is the power of social courage. Musa, alongside many of the prophets, was one individual who spoke out against injustice and oppression. And he didn't fear the blame of the blamers, nor did he think that what can one person do. In the time, there was not a single person who had the courage to speak out against the atrocities the Pharaoh was carrying out in the land. The Israelites were people who were drowning in defeatism. When a person is enslaved for decades, it has an impact on their way of thinking psychologically. So Musa was the one who was trying to break the shackles of defeatism and the shackles of slavery for the Israelites. And he forced them to leave that land out of fear of them being obliterated. So Musa didn't fear being socially marginalized or outcasted. And I think in the day and age that we're living, this is a relevant lesson to us. We sometimes may work in workplaces where we might be the only practicing people there. Our children may be going to schools where the LGBTQ is being pushed on them. And it's in these situations where we shouldn't think about what other people are going to think. Are we the only ones in this position? Rather, the thoughts that we should have is social courage is something that's needed in these circumstances. Standing up for truth and justice is something Allah instructs us to do in all circumstances in life. And the last and final thing is the issue of Palestine. We're all witnessing what's happened in the blessed land of Al-Quds, where Muslims are being bombed during the month of Ramadan, where aid is being prevented. It's a humanitarian crisis where the entire Gazan populace has been shifted into one particular region, where millions of people are now living in Rafah. And only small amounts of food is being smuggled into Gaza currently, meaning that hundreds and thousands of people are now at the verge of malnourishment, lack of food, lack of clean water, lack of access to basic essentials that we take for granted. And in this situation, we should continue spreading awareness of what's happening in Palestine. In addition to other lands where Muslims are suffering, the suffering of the Uyghurs, the suffering of the Sudanese, the suffering of the Rohingyans. These are all sufferings that are happening, and we should continue raising awareness against that oppression and injustice. And this is the way of the prophets. Ibrahim a.s. spoke against idol worship when he's a young boy, despite having nobody siding with him among his community. As a young boy, he spoke out. As a result of that, he was flogged into a fire that his father played a role in preparing for him. So one of the main lessons we learn from the lives of the prophets that have been narrated to us again and again in the previous chapters is social courage. Having the courage to speak up in all circumstances. We ask Allah for tawfiq, and we ask Allah to allow us to maximize what's left of this blessed month and to connect us to His book. وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم وأتوب إليه.